The voicemail came in at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning, and I almost didn't listen to it. I was in the middle of getting ready for work, coffee half, made one earring in the other. Somewhere on the bathroom counter, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. Area code from back home, and it went to voicemail before I even reached for it. I figured it was spam. I figured wrong. The voice on the recording was a woman. Clipped, professional, careful the way people get when they know they're about to deliver something someone doesn't want to hear. She said she was calling on behalf of the county clerk's office. She said there had been a filing. She said my name was listed as a respondent in a property transfer dispute. She said I should come in as soon as possible. I stood in my bathroom with one earring on and listened to that message 3 times. Property transfer dispute. My name, respondent. The rental house on Caldwell Street had been in my family since I was 9 years old. My grandmother bought it with 40 years of savings and the kind of stubbornness that runs in our bloodline like a second skeleton. When she died, she left it to me, not to my mother, not split between us, to me, specifically, my name in a will sheet, had notarized and filed and witnessed by 2 people who were not family. My grandmother was many things. Careless was not one of them. I'd been renting the house out for 6 years. Good tenants, a property manager who handled the day-to-day, and a deed that sat in a fireproof lockbox in my apartment closet alongside my passport and my grandmother's death certificate. I thought about that house the way you think about something that's just always going to be there, like the ground under your feet, like your own name. I called the clerk's office back before I finished my coffee. The woman who answered was not the same woman from the voicemail. This one sounded young, uncertain, but she was reading off a screen and hoping I wouldn't ask follow-up questions. She confirmed the filing. She said a transfer of ownership document had been submitted 4 days ago. She said the new deed listed my mother and my uncle as joint owners. She said, and I remember this exact phrasing, that the filing appeared to be in order. I asked her to repeat that last part. She did. I asked who had submitted it. She hesitated. Then she said she wasn't able to share that information over the phone, and I should come in to review the file in person. I called my property manager next. His name was Terrence, and he'd been managing the Caldwell Street house since before my grandmother passed. He picked up on the second ring. I asked him if anyone had contacted him recently about the property. He said, yes, actually, a man had called 2 weeks ago claiming to be from a title company, asking about the current lease arrangement, the tenant's name, whether there were any liens. Terrence said the man had seemed official enough that he'd answered the questions. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't thought to mention it because he'd assumed it was routine. I told him it was not routine. I left work before I got there. I called my attorney Bevins from the car, not his office line, his cell, because we'd known each other for 11 years, and I needed someone who would speak plainly. He didn't answer. I left a message that was probably too long and not coherent enough, but I said the words property, deed, my mother, and forgery, and I figured that would be enough to get him to call back fast. I drove to my mother's house first. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe. Or the part of me that still wanted there to be an explanation that wasn't what I already knew it was. My mother lived 20 minutes from the inn, the house she'd shared with my uncle. Since their mother, my grandmother, died, they'd moved in together after the funeral. 2 adults in their 60s, deciding that splitting expenses made more sense than going it alone. I had thought at the time that it was practical, mature even. I understood now that it was strategic. I knocked. My uncle answered the door. He looked at me the way people look at you when they've been waiting for you to show up and have had time to rehearse their face. Calm, almost bored. I said I needed to talk to my mother. He said she wasn't home. I said her car was in the driveway. He said she was resting. I said I wasn't leaving. He stepped back and let me in, and the first thing I noticed was the paperwork on the kitchen table. A folder, manila, the kind you get at any office supply store. It was closed, but it wasn't hidden. It was sitting right there in the middle of the table, like it belonged there. Like it had always been there. Like it was waiting for me to see it. My mother came downstairs 2 minutes later. She'd changed into something presentable and done something with her hair, which told me she'd heard the knock and taken her time. She sat down at the kitchen table without looking at the folder. My uncle sat down across from her. I stood. Asked her what she'd done. She said she didn't know what I was talking about. I told her I'd spoken to the clerk's office. I told her I knew about the filing. I told her that her name and my uncle's name were on a deed to a house that belonged to me, and that I wanted to know how that had happened. She looked at her hands, then she looked at my uncle, then she looked at me. She said my grandmother had always intended the house to be shared. She said the will had been made when my grandmother was confused, that she hadn't been thinking clearly, that the lawyers had taken advantage of an old woman's sentiment. She said she and my uncle had only been trying to correct a mistake. I asked her if she'd forged my grandmother's signature. She said that was a very ugly word. I said I was going to need a better answer than that. My uncle spoke then. He said that what they'd done was protect the family's assets. He said I'd been profiting off a property that should have gone to all of us. He said I'd had 6 years of rental income that no one else had seen a dollar of, he said. And I remember exactly how his voice sounded when he said this, flat, and even like he was explaining something obvious, that it was time to make things right. I looked at him for a long moment. I looked at my mother. I picked up my purse and walked out of that house without saying another word, because there was nothing left to say to either of them, and because I needed every minute between that kitchen and the clerk's office to hold myself together. My attorney called back when I was halfway there. I put him on speaker and talked while I drove. He asked me questions. When had the filing been submitted? Had I received any formal notice? Did I still have the original date? I told him yes, the deed was in my apartment in the lockbox where it had always been. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said I needed to get to the clerk's office and request a full copy of the filed documents before I did anything else. He said, do not sign anything. He said, do not speak to my mother or my uncle without him present. He said he was going to make some calls. The clerk's office was on the 3rd floor of the county building, down a hallway that smelled like old carpet and fluorescent light. I told the woman at the front desk why I was there. She typed something. She frowned at her screen in a way that made my chest tighten. She asked me to wait. The woman who came out to meet me was older, with reading glasses on a lanyard, and the deliberate movement of someone who had worked in government long enough to know that slow and accurate beats fast and wrong every time. She introduced herself and took me to a small room with a table and 2 chairs and a stack of copied documents she'd already pulled. She sat down across from me and folded her hands. She said the deed that had been filed 4 days ago bore a notary, stamped from a licensed notary in the county. She said the signatures had passed the initial review. She said the transfer had been logged and was currently showing as pending final processing. I asked what pending final processing meant. She said it meant the transfer was not yet complete. It meant there was still a window. I asked what I needed to do. She said I needed to file a formal dispute in writing with documentation. She said the original deed, the will, and the death certificate would be required at minimum. She said if I believed the filing was fraudulent, I could also contact law enforcement. I asked her, and I want to be honest about this. I asked her, point blank, did she think the filing was fraudulent? She looked at me over her reading glasses. She said she couldn't make that determination. She said that was for the investigators to decide, but she also pushed a business card across the table without saying anything. The card had the name and number of the county's fraud unit printed on it in plain black type. I took the card. I drove home, opened the closet, opened the lockbox, and took out every document I had. The original deed with my grandmother's notarized signature, the will, the death certificate, a letter my grandmother'd written me 3 months before she died that I never had the heart to throw away. I photographed everything. I sent the photographs to my attorney. Then I drove back to the clerk's office with the originals in a folder and filed the dispute before they closed for the day. My attorney reached me that evening. He said he'd spoken to a contact in the fraud unit. He said based on what I described, they had enough to open a preliminary investigation. He said I should not contact my mother or my uncle. He said I should not discuss the situation with extended family. He said to let him handle the communication from here. I said, okay. I did not feel okay. I sat in my apartment that night with the TV on and the volume off, and I thought about my grandmother. I thought about her handwriting, the way she signed her name with a hard downstroke on the G, the way she'd always said a piece of paper means nothing unless you protect it. She taught me to keep copies. She'd taught me to keep originals better. She taught me that blood is not the same thing as loyalty, and I had not wanted to believe her. I believed her now. The investigation took 11 days. I know, because I counted. My attorney kept me updated in short, factual emails that I read and reread more times than I should have. He told me the fraud unit had interviewed the notary whose stamp appeared on the fraudulent deed. He told me the notary had no record of the transaction and had never met my mother or my uncle. He told me her stamp had been replicated digitally from a public filing where her seal had appeared and applied to documents she had never seen. He told me that my mother and my uncle had done this deliberately and had planned it over a period of months. I read that email sitting on the edge of my bed, and I felt something go quiet inside me. Not sad, not angry exactly, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when you finally stop waiting for something to not be true. On the 12th day, I got a call from the lead investigator on the fraud unit. She was direct and professional, and she did not waste words. She said they had gathered sufficient evidence to support charges of deed fraud, forgery of a notary instrument, and filing false documents with a government agency. She said my mother and my uncle would be formally notified. She said the fraudulent deed would be flagged and the transfer would be permanently blocked. She said my ownership of the property on Caldwell Street was not in question and had never been legally compromised. I thanked her. My voice came out steadier than I expected. She said one more thing before she hung up. She said she was sorry I'd had to go through this. She said she'd seen this type of case before. Family members, property, wills, and that it was always harder when it was people who were supposed to protect you. She said I had done everything right. I held the phone after she hung up. Outside my window, the city was doing what it always does, moving and loud and indifferent. And I sat there and let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. Not just the last 11 days, all of it. The years of small requests that had gotten bigger. The loans that were never called loans. The comments about the rental income said casually at holidays that they were just observations and not accounting. The way my uncle had looked at me in my mother's kitchen, not like I was his family, but like I was his family, but like I was a problem that needed solving. My attorney called me in, confirmed the charges. He told me the process from here would move through the criminal system, and I should be prepared for it to take time. He told me I had every legal right to pursue civil damages as well, and that he was prepared to advise me on that when I was ready. He told me to go eat something, which I hadn't done since breakfast. I did. I called Terrence afterward and told him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said he was glad I'd caught it. He said he was sorry he talked to that man from the title company. I told him he hadn't done anything wrong. I told him the house was still meaning. He said he knew. He said he'd always known. My tenant, a woman who'd lived in the Caldwell Street house for 3 years and sent me a card every Christmas, had no idea any of this had been happening. I called her, too. I told her her lease was safe. Her home was safe. Nothing was changing. She cried a little. So did I. I have not spoken to my mother since that morning. In her kitchen, I have not spoken to my uncle. I do not plan to. My attorney handles any communication that needs to happen, and there has been very little. The criminal case is proceeding. There will be hearings. There will be lawyers. There will be, at some point, consequences that I will have to sit through and watch and feel complicated things about, because they are my family, and that fact does not dissolve just because they chose to act like it didn't exist. But the house on Caldwell Street is me. It was my grandmother's, and then it was mine, and it is still mine. The deed is in my lockbox where it has always been. The tenant pays rent on the first of the month. The hydrangeas my grandmother planted in the front yard are still there, or so Terrence tells me, blooming blue every spring the way they always have. My grandmother knew. She knew what she was doing when she sat down with that lawyer and wrote my name on that document and made it real in the way that things become real when they are witnessed and signed and filed. She chose me not to punish anyone. She chose me not to punish anyone. She chose me because she trusted me, because she believed I would protect what she'd built. I did. I will. That has to be enough. And most days now, it is what I keep coming back to is the folder. That manila folder sitting right in the middle of my mother's kitchen table. Not hidden, not put away. Just there, like it was furniture. Like it had always belonged there. I've thought about that image more times than I can count in the weeks since. And I think what unsettles me most is that it tells me everything about what they believed. They believed I wouldn't fight. They believed that being family meant I would absorb it the way I had absorbed everything else. The requests, the pressure, the slow accumulation of things that were never quite demands, but never quite weren't. They were wrong. And the reason they were wrong is the same reason my grandmother left that house to me in the first place. She watched me for 40 years. She watched how I handled things when they got hard. She watched me make decisions that were unpopular because they were right. And she watched me live with the consequences of those decisions without falling apart. She didn't leave me the house because I was her favorite. She left it to me because she trusted my judgment, because she knew that when something needed protecting, I would protect it. That's what I've been sitting with. Not the betrayal, though that's there. And it's real, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But underneath the betrayal is something quieter and more important. The understanding that what my mother and my uncle did was not a sudden thing. It was the end of a long pattern of believing that wanting something was the same as being owed it. That need was a form of entitlement. That family connection was a shortcut around accountability. I did not let that pattern become my problem. And I think that's the thing worth holding on to. When the voicemail came in, I didn't panic. I didn't call my mother first and beg for an explanation. I thought I moved carefully and in the right order. The clerk's office, my attorney, the documentation, the dispute, the fraud unit. Every step followed from the one before it, and every step was possible because I had kept my records. maintain my boundaries, and refuse to let guilt make my decisions for me. There is something almost mechanical about doing the right thing under pressure, and I mean that as a compliment to myself. Feeling fell away. What was left was clarity. And then there's this. My tenant cried when I called to tell her the house was safe. A woman I've rented to for 3 years who sends me a card every Christmas, who had no idea any of this had been happening. She cried with relief. That moment matters to me. That's what I was protecting. Not an asset, not a legal document, a home, a life inside it, a promise I had made without even knowing I'd made it, because it was the kind of person my grandmother raised me to be. What happened to my mother and my uncle is a consequence of their own choices. I don't take satisfaction in it. I also don't carry guilt about it. They chose to act without integrity, and the world responded accordingly. That's not punishment. That's just how things work when you strip away every excuse and look at what's actually there. I still have the letter my grandmother wrote me 3 months before she died. Never thrown it away. I read it again.